This is the Technician Commitment Podcast.
A podcast sharing stories, ideas and opportunities from the Technician Commitment community.
Driving change together.
I'm Charli Corcoran, Lead Animal Care Technician at the Institute of Aquaculture at the University of Stirling.
My name is Michael Bayliss. I am the Senior IT and AV Technician within the School of Histories, Languages and Cultures at the University of Liverpool.
This podcast is created by the sector for the sector.
Hello everyone and welcome back to this podcast episode. Today we are joined by Tim Savage, consultant, author and someone with wealth of experience across leadership, business and personal development. We'll be talking to Tim about his new book, the journeys behind it, his career experience and what continues to inspire his work every day.
We're going to dive into some of the lessons Tim has learned throughout his career, the challenges and successes along the way, and some of the key ideas behind his new book. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm a keen listener and I'm delighted to be here.
So let's start at the beginning, Tim. What drew you into your line of work?
Well, in a word, photography. I was a creative arts specialist at school. I went to art school. And photography is a technical art form. It balances the kind of aesthetic and the technical. And to get the best aesthetic, you need to be really understanding the conventions and the knowing how things work, the possibilities. And I received a grant from the Prince's Trust to buy my first camera, and it really set me on a path. And I smashed it at GCSE. I got an A star, and I was delighted. All my other grades were terrible. But when I went to university, I went there with such enthusiasm. I came in as a practitioner. I was curious. I was excited. But actually, that journey was transformative in the wrong way. I felt de-skilled. I became demotivated. I didn't feel good enough because the focus was on theory, really, rather than practice. It was about talking about photographs rather than actually creating photographs. And it felt like there was a real mismatch. My talents were in the kind of envisaging and the creating and the using the technology and pushing the boundaries. And I was working externally at the time, freelance, where actually people really valued those technical skills I had, but at university they weren't reflected in the criteria. And over time, I took a job as a technician, photography and AV, and it occurred as photography transitioned broadly from analog to digital technologies, where actually I was really enthusiastic about the possibilities of the new medium, and I wasn't wedded to old technologies, and I found myself working with other people in the university to really expand what photography could be in this new format. And I suppose I found I could make a difference. And so, yeah, photography, which is I still think of myself as a photographer. I do other stuff as well. But that was kind of, I suppose, the route in to technical work, really, to value that forms of knowledge and how that knowledge is taught and learnt.
I'm really pleased that you said you smashed it. When you said you smashed it, my eyes opened thinking, he's got this camera and he's just smashed it. But you smashed the grades, which is fantastic. Really, my heart dropped then as an AV technician. It's fantastic that you've sort of started off as a photography student and worked its way into a photography technician / AV technician. Was there a defining moment early in your career where you realised this is the path you wanted to pursue?
I suppose I haven't really decided if this is the path I want to pursue yet, despite my middle and late career stage. But there have certainly been some sliding door moments where taking one path has kind of restricted another. And early on, I suppose I joined in 2000 as a staff member in HE, is, well, what do you do when you hit the top of the grade? Because a lot of technicians I know face that same dilemma. And really, the two options that were out there at the time, one wasn't very likely, which was to become an academic, and the other was to be a manager. And I wanted to continue with my practice. And these days, things are a little bit easier in that regard. There's more, positive routes for people. But I applied for an academic role and I didn't get it. And I didn't get feedback other than, technicians can't transition to academic roles. And that felt really unjust. And I felt quite unhappy about that because actually I met the criteria, I was teaching other institutions. And I thought, well, actually, that's okay, I'll take that. But it started a fascination with me between, what is an academic teaching role versus what is a technical teaching role? Where's the difference? What's the line between? And that would really set me on my path as to what I was going to research. And ultimately, I became manager, which I had greater impact, much greater impact than as an individual, working with teams outside my discipline at a team level, a campus level, and a university level. I mean, I worked up through technical services manager. I became the director of technical learning at UCA, so multiple campuses, multiple disciplines. And that really, I suppose, gave me a sense of what was possible when you bring people with you. On a common cause, which was far more than I could have achieved as a photographer, though I did all right there. But I suppose, yes, it was realising I could make a difference, not just to the institution and the technicians, but subsequently through my research, providing a catalyst for some conversations more generally in the sector about what technicians are, what they could be, what they actually do versus what we think they do. So yeah, I suppose the defining moment spread out over time, and it still continues to that path is still working its way.
I think we'll have a lot of listeners that relate very well to you saying you still don't know if it's the path you want to follow, though. That's possibly a lot of people get through still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, as I say quite a lot to my kids. So.
It's brilliant to know that you've applied for an academic role. You were somewhat classed as a teaching technician, and you've got knocked back. What were some of the biggest lessons that you've learned in your early career stage that you've learned from?
Well, I suppose early on, something I picked up quite quickly, I think, was that my institution at the time I thought of it as an effort amplifier. In that the more I put in, the more of myself I invested, the more that I benefited. And accordingly, I would put my hand up for everything. So if there was a working group to explore, I don't know, something on the fringes of my role, or even something that wasn't, that I could lend a perspective to that might make it better for the people that I work with, then I would do that. And it created a really much more interesting and fulfilling work life. It helped expand my network because I was meeting people, within the institution and beyond that I wouldn't have otherwise done. And I developed a small reputation for someone who might be able to help with certain things. And that, I think, I saw others do it too. And I suppose that the risk of that is, of course, you end up working in spaces and taking on more responsibility, and you can become oversubscribed. But for me, I really felt that when I was putting my energies in, it was paying me back. And I think that felt like going the extra mile became the norm. And that, I think, it drove me, and I saw success, and success builds success. But another lesson, I suppose, early in my career to just kind of progressing into my more junior management roles was how to manage the them and us relationships with the academic staff. And early on, it just didn't feel right. I won't talk about the class debates here, but they're real. They're real and they're harmful. I've seen people really affected, and I've felt it myself. And I don't claim to have found a kind of magic recipe for respectful collaboration, but I suppose in terms of a lesson, I am now clearer, I suppose, how academic and technical teams can work together at a local level when systems and structures and policy are more effective and professionally inclusive at an institutional level. I think you need the framework. And a lesson I also learned, my last lesson, I suppose, for this question is we'll lean into the blurring. We read a lot about technician and academic roles and other, academic adjacent roles blurring. And I would say embrace it and don't let your job description become a cage. When I began my career, there were a lot of people that said, well, I'm not doing that. That's not my job. That's an academic job. And that may well be. But I would say stretch and grow. The skills that you build whilst working in universities, which are places of education, are your own. They become part of you and they change you. And if they aren't recognised at your institution, it's likely they will be at another. So I would say, when I first joined HE as a student, the technicians very much, that's not my job in certain areas. And that serves no one. It doesn't serve the students. It doesn't serve the institution. It doesn't serve the technicians either.
It's great that you said right at the start then, what you put in is what you get out, basically. and the more effort you put in. I think sometimes a lot of technicians I know have been accused of being yes people too much, but they're putting themselves out there to get more involved, to get more visible, and to get, success brings success in the sense of career progression or job opportunities or even getting your name out there. So I think that's fantastic. Obviously, I'm too much of a yes person, but you can be too much of a yes person and take on too much workload. But then that will also show that you need more demand. You need more resource to support the demand. It's fantastic. The lessons there, I'm going to learn a lot from your lessons, that's for sure.
So looking back, were there any risks or decisions that have completely changed your direction?
Yes, I mean, there's been a number of risks, and we're always at different junctions. And I think, Mike, going back to your comment, I agree with you. You can overdo the yes, can't you? And then you're running at 1,000 miles an hour doing someone else's job, and then you get told off for not doing your own. But I think we can probably safely say that HE is in dire straits right now for a number of different reasons, and we need to change. Now, we won't change if we just keep doing the same thing. Now, that is an institutional level, but it also trickles down to a team and an institutional level. So I suppose, yes, if you transition your role, change is what's needed. And I don't think we need to be change phobic. And in terms of, risks and decisions, I suppose the one that was quite, I suppose at the time felt quite disruptive was when I chose to enroll on a PG Cert course. So I was working as a technical services manager at the time. So I wasn't student-facing necessarily, although I was constantly dealing with students. But in terms of was I writing and delivering the curriculum? Well, no, I wasn't. But I enrolled on this 2-year PG Cert in learning and teaching, and it was transformative. I mean, I got some heat for studying on that course. I got, certain technical staff saying, well, hang on, what do you think you're doing? This isn't our job, you're getting above your station. And for academics saying, well, look, you've taken a space here. That could have gone to an academic. But it really, it changed my trajectory. It gave me a deeper understanding of the other roles and functions of different staff members, academic and professional support, what different departments did around issues and legislation of inclusivity, of academic standards, compliance, and it really gave me the theories and language, I suppose, in which I was able to better contextualize my own leadership of my technical team, which at the time, this was 15 odd years ago, it was still very much a binary, although there were blurring of responsibilities around learning and teaching. It was still very much that technical teaching was, I'll show you how to use this piece of kit, and that was kind of it. But hopefully being able to contribute and to the PGC lessons, I was sat next to my academic colleagues, we're learning the same thing and realising actually we're not so different. And what we do isn't so different. And that was valuable, I think, not just for me, but also for those academic colleagues in that institution, as we kind of, I suppose, closed up a little bit, that them and us, just by, respectfully acknowledging that there are different pressures on different roles. We each make a contribution. It didn't change the world, but it certainly changed me.
Fantastic. Just that collaboration and being in the same space and learning the same things has had such an impact on you. And I would hope them as well. So not just your direction, but theirs. What challenges have shaped you the most professionally, would you think?
I mean, I've faced a lot of challenges. I suppose I've transitioned into leadership management within a few years of being a technician, and originally to a smaller team and then, progressing to a much larger team. And the challenge is a day-to-day element of leadership management, and some of them leave a mark on you. And I suppose that one of the strongest ones I've faced is the kind of element in which technicians feel they can't describe their teaching as teaching. We tend to use the language of instruction, induction, demonstration, tutoring, but it's actually quite rare that someone can say, I'm a technician and I teach, without feeling that they're somehow, encroaching into a special thing that's only done by academic teams. In fact, part of the reason that I enrolled on a PhD to explore technical teaching was because I was interested, along with my kind of experience of being told you're not good enough to work in this job family, is to really understand where the line is between technical teaching and academic teaching. And I suppose if I take it back to my discipline of photography, a photography technician, for example, would show you how to use equipment or process or tools or help you when you got stuck. But I remember in a course board meeting, an academic had said, look, these technicians really need to know their place. And it was because the technician had offered advice beyond how to use the tool. So students had asked, well, what colour treatment should I use for this image, or should I crop it differently? And the technician had given an opinion and suggested, well, actually, you should look at this artist because this artist uses the same technique you're using. But that was really frowned upon because that was, affecting the development of the work, the aesthetic, the kind of cerebral element of creativity rather than the practical element. So it was well outside the technical, and it just felt like complete nonsense to me. That students are grown up enough to value different sources of input and feedback without worrying about the contract status of who's offering that feedback. And it felt as a means of containing the technicians in their box and disrespecting their very valid knowledge, of which many are, very capable practitioners, master's level qualified, teaching qualifications. And that I suppose, really got me to look at that line. And I co-wrote an article with Kelly Veer on this, which is available online, about why is it problematic for technicians to claim they teach. And it's quite a punchy article, so it's worth looking up. But when I explored this through my research, one of my participants described it as institutional gaslighting, which I thought was a great phrase. But it really points also to technician imposter syndrome, which, that's a challenge that I face. And I listened to the interview with Jatine when he talks about winning the Times Higher Award and just not believing it and checking the next day that it was actually him. That's absolutely the case, a major challenge. And it's so easy to be self-limiting as a technician because we exist in a world where we're defined as non-academics, so defined in the negative. So a challenge that shaped me professionally is certainly imposter syndrome. And my approach to it, I don't know if it's the right one, but is to credentialise and grow. So to try and get more qualifications, to write papers, to advance the HE fellowships. But the problem with imposter syndrome is the more you develop, the less you feel that you've, you're worthy of these accolades that you've collected. So I suppose the way I've dealt with that is I just kind of have to make peace with success. And technicians don't do that. You pay a technician a compliment and they're deferential. It wasn't all me. I had plenty of help. And actually, as a group, we need to stand up and take some credit and, recognise not just when you've done well, but when your peers have done well. Because I think making peace with the fact we're an important job family and we make a real difference is a key that can at least help dent the imposter situation.
Imposter syndrome is something we talk about quite a lot, isn't it, Mike? It comes up quite a lot, and I think everyone experiences it to some degree, but I like that, make peace with success. I think it's a lovely phrase. You can use that all the time. Was there a moment where things didn't go to plan, and what did you learn from that? I'm assuming there's probably more than one moment where things didn't go to plan.
Loads. And I suppose a big part of my career has been planning for things that didn't work out. Things like capital investment programs, bidding to, different funding providers, staffing requests, business cases, technical strategies, all those kind of things are speculative and you have a plan. And it doesn't always work out. And that can be a little bit demoralising. That's abortive work, isn't it? Or it can seem that way. And I suppose one of the most significant ones I can think of is I spent 6 months of my life working with architects, technicians, lecturers on a plan for a £40 million business school in Epsom at the campus of the University of Creative Arts. And it was a complex building, very high-profile architects. I'd worked out the sizes and the specification of all the specialist technical spaces. We'd modelled student number forecasts, the way in which different disciplines, creative and other, were taught, what were the pedagogies, what were the learning outcomes, how many hours would people need to spend. It was huge. And that work went into a schedule of accommodation so that the architects could build that into this incredible pinnacle piece. And it was a complex pressure. It was the VC's vision. There was no ambiguity around this. This had to be perfect. And it cost me evenings, sleepless nights, but ultimately it was never built. We never found the £40 million. that, I suppose, I had to make peace with that, because that energy I could have put that into other things. But I sort of reflected on this, and I'm proud of the work that I did. And if it had been built, it would have been incredible. But the fact that it didn't, I had to make a deal with myself that, you know, I didn't need to feel sad about this. That was outside of my control. I did my very best, and actually, I learned a great deal. Of planning and kind of the language of construction, and going through REBA architect stages and competitions, and that in itself was an outcome for me. But also a bigger thing that I picked up from it, I suppose, is that institutions quite often plan for grand things, and actually my presence in the project was that having, you know, pragmatic, calm, technical brains that go through this and show that actually the project isn't viable is a good outcome in and of itself. So although the thing didn't get built, at least we knew what it needed to be, so the decision not to go forward with it was appropriately informed. So yeah, I suppose that's a spin on the question when it didn't go to plan. But sometimes your involvement as a technician means it doesn't go as somebody else envisages, because they don't necessarily have the full understanding of the facts of what that vision is, because it's a mental image until it becomes a kind of, you know, technical, real world material image, which is something that I write in my book about technicians transitioning from a mental realm into a physical realm.
I think that even on a smaller scale, even just technician involvement in experiment planning or project planning, you know, it will change from what the academic initially thought just by having your involvement in that. So it's such a great point that, yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and obviously very disheartening to put all that work in and get nothing from it. But it's a learning curve for anyone to be heavily involved with. I can ask a really deep question now, Tim, to you. Do you think success today looks different to how you imagined it years ago? Do you think, you know, as a young Tim, do you think you've progressed to where you wanted to be?
Oh, wow. Let me return to my inner self. Well, I suppose I'm the first in my family to go to university. Never expected to get a degree. Ended up with 5 of them. But I didn't expect knowledge, and art school and university, and, you know, working in spaces that I find myself now. No, for me personally, no. I mean, here I am recording a podcast that people might listen to my voice and hopefully see some value. I mean, that in itself is wow. Never thought I'd do that in my life, and here I am doing exactly that. But I suppose from a technical point of view, I think about the job family. And I've been a part of that, and I've lived it. I've been so fortunate, I think, in my career to have had a front seat in a small university where you were drawn into everything. In much larger universities, you are, you know, atomized, and the technicians are in one, you know, different corners, and probably don't get involved with kind of the running of the institution and fundamental decisions about the character of the curriculum, what's taught and how. I was fortunate to do that. But in terms of the role itself, I joined as a technician. Friends would say, well, look, you're just going to be lugging tellies around and, you know, working in the background. And that was true, because it started by fixing things, supporting students when they get stuck, and some sort of low-level demos, really with a focus on competency, stopping students from breaking things or hurting themselves. But fast forward that kind of 25 years, technical roles are so much richer now and diverse. They're varied, and very often, rather than work in those kind of atomized corners of institutions, they're now front and centre. They're attached to the institutional KPIs, the key performance indicators, which institutions judge themselves and each other by. So there are technicians being recognised in the ref in 2029. The metrics there are being established that will be more inclusive. There's great work being done there. My former line manager, Simon Macklin's the chair of the People, Culture and Environment Group, and Kelly Veer is actually the deputy chair. So there's a real sense of technicians being present in that. The TEF too. I've just literally today I've written a guest blog for Advanced HE that will come out, and it shows that in 2017 just under a fifth of technicians were referenced in the TEF by providers, but by 2023, I did some analysis recently, that had increased to over a third, and that didn't have time for the talent recommendations to have had an impact on 2023, and neither will it have captured the work on career pathways, promotional pathways, the ETPs that are found in the sector. So the trajectory for technicians being drawn into the core business of universities, which is learning and teaching, but also research, is now absolutely something at the front of what we can expect from the technical job family. And I suppose for managers, that's a challenge too. For technical managers have normally been technicians and work their way up through length of service and become managers. And the role has changed. You're not managing technicians in studios and workshops who deal with just the compliance elements and, maintenance and procurement and those kind of background stuff. We've transitioned those managers now, just as technician roles have transitioned. The managers have too. And I wrote a blog on that quite recently, and I talked about the 5 Ps of technical management now, which is people, performance, productivity, politics, and policy, which is very different to health, safety, maintenance, and those kind of behind the scenes elements.
So much more that's involved now. Yeah,
it's a different game. Yeah.
So we can link all the links to your blogs and articles in the show notes so people can find them easily. But shall we start talking about your book now?
Yeah, I'm excited to do that.
I'm really looking forward to hearing about it. Mike, do you want to host one? I feel like I've stolen your...
Don't worry. So I was just listening in depthly to what you have to say. I can just get lost in all your information. The new book, I want to know what inspires you to write the book.
Okay, well, I suppose the first thing to separate but also join is that it was, I suppose, what inspired me to conduct the PhD that became the book. And something that, a lot of my answers so far have really focused on that space between technical and academic around the learning and teaching element and the injustice I felt and the blurring that didn't really have character around it. But in terms of inspiring me to write a book, I saw a quote quite recently that resonated, and it was by Tony Robinson, and I'll say that's not the guy who played Baldrick in Blackadder, it's the author. But it said, if there's a book you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. And I thought, well, actually, that's kind of what I did, because as a PG Cert student trying to make sense of my technical teaching and learning, I found that all the literature I was reading and all the policy and research was written by academic staff about academic practices and for academic audiences. And I didn't feel like I belonged, but what I was doing felt a lot like what the academic colleagues were doing. And I thought, I need literature. I need to be able to understand and contextualize my practice in a broader framework, because I felt very self-taught. I was really working as a point of, well, how I was taught is how other people should be taught. But actually, I didn't know what I didn't know. And having gone through a process of discovering that, I wanted to share that. So I suppose the inspiration came from that, which I talk in the book about. I should say what it's called. It's called Technical Teaching in Higher Education, Insights from the Creative Arts. And it comes from my experience in Creative Arts HE, but it's subsequently been tested in broader disciplines, and that's why it's a wider title. But I suppose when I was thinking, how do I make sense of what I'm seeing in my institution, I called it a technical turn. And a technical turn is a number of factors combined, where changes in HE have kind of shifted the purpose of universities, their reasons for being, and what is taught and why, from what was for a long time knowledge and understanding, that kind of scholarship and knowledge. And we've seen that transition through to knowledge and skills. And as Ronald Bartlett wrote recently in a blog for HEPI, the current outcome is all skills. And just as skills gained in, I suppose, emphasis in institutions and from government and regulator and graduates and employers, academic roles changed as well. Academic roles became more diversified, fractured. There's literature that talks about a de-skilling of academic roles. There's a disaggregation. And in the arts specifically, with the trend of creativity being considered cerebral and the old institutes of arts becoming university of arts, the kind of academic workforce drifted that way, which meant many, and in some of the practical disciplines, became less involved in teaching. And that led to the evolving and changing role of technicians as they became more drawn deeply into teaching. But it had occurred through creep rather than strategy. So these things were happening, but no one was making sense of them in any meaningful way. And I remember my staff at UCA taking annual leave from their day jobs, and they go to another university down the road and they deliver the same sessions as visiting lecturers, but they'd be paid triple the salary. And I thought, well, this doesn't make sense, does it? We've got to kind of name it and call it out for what it is. And subsequently, the PhD was a means for me to take a systematic approach to casting a net across the UK. I had research sites across, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, England, different types of institutions, multi-faculty institutions, monotechnics, small and specialist, long established, across a range of different disciplines to really cast a net that says, what is it that technicians teach? How do they teach it? And why do they teach it? What's the kind of philosophical purpose that underpins their teaching, so that I could, rather than contextualize practice-based technical teaching in academic frameworks, I could create one that was generated by people that were genuinely doing this work that people were talking about, and put it in their words. And it helped me, I suppose, put meat on the bone for some of the things I was seeing. At the time, I was appointed to the Talent Commission as a commissioner, which was a fantastic experience. Hugely grateful for everybody that participated and for being invited. But one of the primary outcomes for me with my interest in learning and teaching was that the volume of technical teaching that was coming out of the sector. And it was high everywhere. I think it was 81% of technicians were involved with teaching, which was, from memory, I think 95% in the creative arts. So there was a real sense that the practitioner elements of creative arts were drawing more on the technical teaching. And from my experience, that technical teaching was quite sophisticated, and it felt sensible to kind of capture and crystallize that in a means that could be shared with other areas of the sector that are likely to follow suit. So in doing so, I guess the inspiration, this is a long answer, isn't it? But the inspiration for it was to make sense of something I was seeing in my own institution that felt unjust. And I felt there was more to gain. I thought the university would perform better in a more collaborative and cohesive ecosystem where everybody's learning and teaching contribution was valued and recognised and developed, rather than this sort of difficult binary which forced a lot of us into the margins and excluded us from things like quality assurance, quality enhancement, workload allocation models, curriculum, timetabling. There were so many opportunities that were put towards one side of the teaching workforce that the other side, who were actually doing quite a lot of teaching, were excluded from, and it just didn't feel right. So I suppose that was the inspiration behind the PhD.
I mean, you clearly, your answers are so in depth. You're clearly really passionate about this topic, and I mean, we've written a book, so clearly you're very passionate about this topic. But who do you see that this book is for? Who's the target audience of the book?
Target audience, I suppose. There are three main audiences I had in mind. The first is absolutely technicians. I was a technician for many years, still think of myself as a technician and a photographer, because I said I was a photographer earlier, so I'll be both. And I suppose I wanted to build some of that confidence through language and legitimacy to some of those practices we think we do, but we can't always say we do. To share practice. And also give people, I suppose, a sense you don't know what you don't know. And I suppose when you look across the framework of people who've contributed, some people have launched initiatives, they've been recognised in different ways, and that helps you see, well, what could be possible in a technical teaching role. But also it could be used to support career progression and recognition, and particularly things like advanced HE fellowships, which are important. They're qualified teacher status. Institutions gain benefit from them, but so do individuals, and professional recognition as well. Academics, another area. This book is written by technicians for technicians primarily, but actually an understanding of what happens in self-directed study, what happens when an academic asks for a workshop to be run. Actually, one of the things that the book really teases out is that very often it's a small amount of information that is given to the technician. Teach a class in such and such, without necessarily knowledge of, well, what is it you need them to learn? Because I can shape this in any which way, but the way in which you steer and you collaborate with technical staff, not only does it break down the kind of silos that we're used to, but it also values, and becomes complementary. So rather than double up on what's being taught or have a great big gap in the middle, I hope that the book will be helpful for them. And the sector, I suppose, in my career, I've worked at different levels. And as a member of a university executive and a director, and working with other organisations, I know that a lot of the information is drawn on outdated stereotypes of what we think technicians do. And I suppose I want to provide the information, a kind of empirical framework that's been drawn from real world practice in our universities to help inform decisions about, well, what do we do with the technical model going forward? How do we recognise it, resource it? How do we plan workforces? And that could be at an institutional level, or hopefully policy and government level. What do we do in respect of setting out workload allocation models, the great work on career pathways, but also to evidence the impact. What does technical teaching look like in terms of excellence? How do we best record it in the TEF? How do technician activities affect the NSS, and how do we improve those metrics? And how do we link those skills that are taught in studios and workshops that might not be explicit in the curriculum or the outcomes into what graduates need and what employers need? Because I think something I'm passionate about is connecting. If somebody comes to your university and you sell them a particular experience and a possible future is to deliver on that, and a risk, of course, is that if you talk about a career in a practical based discipline, as I talked about in photography, I came in as a photographer wanting to be a photographer, and I was under the impression that's what my course would be, but actually it tried to make me a fine artist with a camera rather than a photographer, and I suppose I would have become a theorist. So I suppose it's providing sector leaders, academics and technicians with a kind of real-world, empirically derived framework in which to contextualise learning and teaching of technicians.
Sounds like it's going to be a fantastic resource. I'm not a teaching technician, but I'm looking forward to reading it. So I imagine there's going to be lessons I can learn from my team through it as well. So not just for teaching technicians, I think.
No, support. So, I mean, teaching is a broad church, and everybody in the university should be contributing to the core mission. Now, there's the famous quote of NASA, isn't there? The guy who cleans the toilets, putting a man on the moon. And I suppose this is a similar piece of recognition, no matter what your role. And it also extends sideways. I talk about technicians because it's my passion, but there are many other people in a similar boat, whether they're academic librarians, careers advisors, those third space roles is of people who support students, where actually that's where learning happens. It's outside of those teaching moments where students make sense of that knowledge and they apply it in new ways. And that's when the technical workforce who are there at that particular time, who deal with that student's individual problem, that's where the breakthroughs very often happen. So no, you don't have to be a teaching technician. This is about a celebration of the technical job family.
Fantastic. And did writing the book change your perspective on your own experiences at all?
Yes. That's a good question. In fact, it didn't just change them. It really helped me organise them and evidence them. And I suppose that helped me take what was a kind of constellation of thoughts and put them into a kind of linear, explainable sequence, because that's what you have to do when you write a book. Same way when you plan a demonstration or a lesson. You know loads about your subject, but to kind of articulate it in a way that an audience can not get turned off too quickly because you go large. And that's really, I suppose, what I did transitioning the PhD into the book, is to keep the meat of it, but take it away from being an academic textbook or a scholarly text and produce it as a reasonably easy to read, helpful document. And I suppose in terms of a different perspective, it helped me see something from the perspective of the participants, of which there were, I think 24, but drawn from very different backgrounds to me, and different institutions, different disciplines. And it helped me realise, I mean, I thought what I was doing in my university at the time was, really unusual. We were pushing these boundaries, hadn't heard much about it. But when I went out into the world, it's happening everywhere. And actually in other places, really successfully, and sometimes better. So I suppose it helped me realise that my perspective that had been kind of narrow and inward facing was actually better informed and more robust when looked outward. And that was helpful through talent and nationally. And it helped me develop. And actually, recently, some of the work Technician Commitment's been doing internationally shows these things are, these worldwide, are international, global trends that I think, we're in a good shape for, and having the language and frameworks, I hope, will be helpful.
It's just, I'm really looking forward to reading the book. Apart from being within the creative arts industry myself and having come from like studios and theatres and now working in HE, it's going to be... it's going to be a great read. I'm really, really looking forward to it. If someone only took one lesson away from the book, what do you think that lesson would be? It's a bit of a tricky question because your book's very broad in the sense of supporting so many technicians within teaching and creative arts. But what one lesson do you think someone would take away from that book?
I suppose if it was just one lesson, and it's quite it does a lot and puts in different perspectives. But I suppose if I had to put it into one thing, I'd say that technical teaching is proper teaching. It's not some kind of lower order form of instruction that sits below academic teaching. Teaching is teaching. When you look up teaching in the dictionary, it describes showing and telling people how to do things. That's what technicians do all the time. There are different levels and sophistication and contexts where teaching can be, interpreted differently. And what the book does, it sets out 5 different ways of conceiving of technical teaching, but none of them are necessarily better than another. They are what I would call a plurality of excellent technical teaching, and different approaches are appropriate for different environments, and they become progressively more sophisticated. So you may in your career, maybe early on, be comfortable with certain types of technical instruction, not necessarily being aware that there are different models in which you can contribute, really expand learners' ways of thinking, not just of their practice, but through their practice. And it becomes transformative. It transforms people. It's not just what they know, but it's what they can do, who they can be. I suppose the one message is, technical teaching is proper teaching.
I 100% agree. As a technical teacher myself, who is heavily involved in, I don't want to say how many modules now, but
I can say boy if you want.
It's looking like 20 in the next academic year, which I don't know if I'm feasibly able to cut myself into 20 pieces to support every single module
Just as you go,
that requires.
Going back to being too much of a yes man, I think. Yeah.
Yes, just a yes man. It's too much of a yes man. But the problem is, if you enjoy it, that's the thing I'm getting from it. The enjoyment of supporting your students. One of the things that I was taught, technicians are there to help people. That's your main sort of tagline, if that makes sense. And I love teaching and demonstrating and supporting students, and seeing that light bulb effect pop in their brain that it's that simple. This is really fun. This is really interesting. So I'm hoping everyone's going to get out of the book more than that one lesson, and I'm hoping everyone's going to draw so much information from the book, and from future publications you're going to bring out, Tim.
Well, I hope so too. I'm conscious also, I am preaching to the choir here, aren't I? I mean, yes. When I talk with people who teach who are technicians, I'm just telling them things they already know. I suppose one of the benefits I hope that the book will do is it articulates these same sentiments and content, but in academic language and frameworks and forums, where actually the book closes with a really provocative chapter on how HE needs to change and how it should change and why why these changes are kind of desperately needed. And what's been helpful about that is I've enlisted support from different camps to say, well, look, HE works best when technical and academic teams collaborate, and the structure of the book matches its message. Kelly Veer has kindly written the foreword to the book. Professor Susan Orr has written the afterword. So there's a kind of, I suppose, is written to show that collaboration and integration is absolutely the way forward for a sector in challenge, and bringing the pedagogies and roles of technicians into the foreground is not the silver bullet that solves the crisis, but it's a really important component in having fit for purpose, optimally operating institutions that offer value for money, but also give students who want to be practitioners the kind of education that they need.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. Tim, we're going to run out of time, and we can talk forever. And I just want to say thank you so much for the conversation about your history and talking about the book. I think the book is what we're here for, and to know more about you. But I'm thinking, Charli, this could be a part two. We could bring Tim back in. We've got a whole load more questions to ask you, more to dive into regarding the book. We could dive into that when the book's released. More to dive into regarding sort of your background, what inspired you, some quick fire questions. We've got loads more we can talk about with you, Tim. And I think we could talk for a while. But unfortunately for this episode, we're going to have to give it a close to the end. And thank you for, all your support, supporting technicians out there with your PhD, with your publications. You're being there as a shoulder to talk to. Even I've come to you in the past for just talking to you about advice. So being there for technicians, you're advocating the true meaning of what a technician is. So thank you so much for everything you do.
Well, no, thank you. And it's been great to be here and to share some of this. It's the first time I've really spoken about the book in this kind of forum. It's been, with PhD supervisors and things like that. So no, I'm really excited about sharing it. It's such a labour of love over such a period that I hope will help people that face some of the similar struggles to me.
Where can you get the book from?
It's available on Amazon, okay, so you can get it there, but it's a bit cheaper at the moment on the Routledge website, and they've given me a discount code that I can share, which is 26AFLY2. Okay, that's valid until the end of September. So if you wanted to buy a copy, then do, but better than that, get your institution to buy some copies. It'll be an invaluable textbook for technicians, particularly staff development, but also academics too, and advanced HE fellowships, all those kind of things. But even better than that, if you want to, you can persuade your institution to get me to come over, and I'll talk about it and give copies out. But I'm really excited to share it, and I hope it's valuable.
Fantastic. I just echo everything Mike said. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful talk. I've been so interested listening to everything you've got to say. And hopefully we can finish the recording in an episode 2. That would be good. Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Technician Commitment podcast. To learn more about the Technician Commitment, or if you're interested in joining, please visit the Technician Commitment website, which we will link in the description of this podcast. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the Technician Commitment podcast wherever you get your podcasts.